Drive deep into the woods of rural Lake County in the northwestern corner of Michigan's Lower Peninsula, and you will come upon a small, quiet town wrapped around a chain of lakes. There are a few hundred year-round residents, most of them older. There are boarded-up buildings that were clearly once something grander. A nightclub here, a hotel there, the bones of a resort. In the winters, the snow piles up on the roofs of empty cottages, and every so often one of those roofs caves in under the weight, and no one is there to fix it. It is a peaceful place, a forgotten place, the kind of place you would drive through without a second glance, and never imagine that anything had ever happened here at all. Now go back in time to a summer weekend in the middle of the 1950s and stand on this exact same ground. You cannot move. The town is packed. 25,000 people have poured into it, overwhelming the few hundred who live here year-round. The beaches on the lake are covered with families. Cars line every road. The hotels are full. The boarding houses are full. People are renting out spare rooms and screened porches. And when the sun goes down, the nightclubs light up, and the biggest names in Black American music take the stage. Louis Armstrong, who owns a home just up the road. Della Reese, B. King, Sarah Vaughan, Aretha Franklin, the Four Tops. The clubs are so hot, the talent so constant, that people have started calling this little town in the Michigan woods the summer Apollo of the North. Doctors and lawyers and teachers from Chicago and Detroit are here in their finest clothes dancing until dawn. Children are running along a lakeshore where every single face they see, every business owner, every performer, every neighbor looks like them. It is by every account of the people who lived it, paradise. They called it Black Eden. So here is the question this whole story turns on. How does a paradise like that, 25,000 people, 300 black-owned businesses, the greatest entertainers in America, become the silent, half-empty town in the woods that it is today? What could possibly destroy something so alive? And this is the part that makes Idlewild unlike every other place we have ever told you about, because nobody destroyed it, no freeway was rammed through it, no bulldozer cleared it, no fire, no flood, no factory closing, no bank collapse. There was no villain. The people who loved Idlewild were not driven out of it against their will. They left it willingly, joyfully, and in leaving it, they emptied it. Because Idlewild was killed by the single greatest thing that happened to Black America in the 20th century. Idlewild was destroyed by freedom. To understand how a paradise can die of a victory, you have to understand exactly what Idlewild was and why it existed at all. And it existed because of a wall. This story begins with the wall, and it ends when the wall comes down. In 1912, 4 white couples, 2 from the small town of White Cloud, Michigan, and 2 from Chicago, formed a company called the Idlewild Resort Company. Their names were Branch and Lemon and Wright, and they were business people, and they had spotted an opportunity that most white businessmen of the era were too blinkered by their own prejudice to see. They understood something about America that the country itself refused to acknowledge. They understood that there was, by 1912, a real and growing black middle class, doctors, lawyers, ministers, teachers, entrepreneurs, mostly clustered in the industrial cities of the Midwest like Chicago and Detroit, and that these were people with education, with ambition, and crucially, with money. Money they wanted to spend on the same things any successful family wanted: rest, leisure, a summer place, a vacation. And they could not have it, because this was the era of Jim Crow, and the color line ran through every resort, every hotel, every beach, every vacation town in America. A black surgeon who could afford the finest holiday in the country was turned away at the door of nearly every place that offered one. The great resorts were closed to him. The nice hotels would not rent him a room. Even the roads themselves were dangerous. A black family driving north for a holiday had to plan around sundown towns, places where a black person caught after dark could be beaten or killed, and had to carry guides that told them which gas stations and restaurants would even serve them. The entire leisure economy of the United States, the whole beautiful machinery of the American vacation, had a sign hung on it that said, "This is not for you." So the four white couples of the Idlewild Resort Company bought roughly 2,700 acres of cheap overlogged woodland in rural Lake County. Now that was no good for farming, but was wrapped around 5 pretty lakes, and they did the shrewdest thing imaginable. They created a resort exclusively for the people everyone else was turning away. They marketed lots for as little as $35 in the pages of the black press in newspapers like the Chicago Defender, selling not just a cabin or a room, but the land itself, and with it something no advertisement could quite put into words: the promise of recreation and relaxation without humiliation, a place where a black family could swim and dance and own the ground under their feet, and not once, for a single moment, have to brace themselves for the color line. It was a business built on segregation, built to profit from the fact that black America had been locked out of everywhere else, and it worked beyond anything its founders could have dreamed. Because the people came, and the people they attracted were extraordinary. One of the very first to buy property at Idlewild was Dr. Daniel Hale Williams, the surgeon who had founded the first black-owned hospital in America and performed one of the first successful open-heart surgeries in the country. He built a summer home on a lake, and the lake itself was eventually named in his honor. Where a man like that led, others followed. Madam C.J. Walker, the entrepreneur who built a cosmetics empire and became the first self-made female millionaire in America, was among the early wave of property owners. In 1920, W.E.B. Du Bois himself, the towering scholar, the co-founder of the NAACP, the conscience of black America, came to Idlewild and he bought a piece of land. The novelist Charles Chesnutt built a cottage. Violette Anderson, the first black woman ever admitted to argue a case before the United States Supreme Court, owned property here. The Idlewild Lot Owners Association eventually counted members from more than 30 states. This was not some rustic getaway. This was where the entire black professional and intellectual class of America came to see and be seen, to stand on a beach in their swimsuits and their Sunday best, and for a few weeks each summer live in a world where being black and being successful and being at ease were all at last the same thing. They built a genuine intellectual life to go with the leisure. In the 1920s and 30s, a Baptist minister named Robert Bradby organized annual gatherings called Chautauquas, week-long events that drew people from all over the country for lectures and discussions on the great questions facing black America, the critical issues of the day for black entrepreneurs and thinkers and activists. Followers of Marcus Garvey's movement mingled here with members of Du Bois's NAACP. Idlewild was not only a place to relax, it was a place where black America came together to think about its own future, in a country that had walled it out of nearly every other room where such thinking happened. And by the 1950s, at its absolute peak, Idlewild had become something staggering. Nearly 3,000 acres, the largest resort for black Americans in the entire continental United States, 10 times the size of its nearest rivals. As many as 25,000 vacationers would flood into it on a peak summer weekend, temporarily turning a tiny rural township into a booming city. It supported more than 300 black-owned businesses, hotels, motels, restaurants, beauty shops, barber shops, taverns, gas stations, real estate offices. There was an island in the middle of the lake called simply the Island, with a beach and a dance pavilion and a clubhouse. There was the Casa Blanca Hotel, the largest in town, which served as the unofficial headquarters for the whirl of it all. And then there was the nightlife, which is the thing the legends are truly made of. Idlewild's clubs, the Paradise Club, the Flamingo Club, the Club El Morocco, the Purple Palace, that became one of the most important stops in all of Black American entertainment. A Saginaw businessman named Arthur Braggs ran the Paradise Club, and he built a full-scale revue there with a chorus line of showgirls and dancers performing from May to September, and he brought in the biggest acts in the country. A Detroit hotel man named Phil Giles ran the Flamingo Club and the Hotel Giles and built Idlewild as the resort capital of America, and the performers who came through those clubs are, quite literally, a roll call of 20th century black music. Louis Armstrong bought a home here back in 1928 and wrote in his own autobiography about the joy of swimming and riding horses at Idlewild. Della Reese honed her craft on these stages. Sarah Vaughan sang here. Dinah Washington, Duke Ellington, Cab Calloway, Ella Fitzgerald, B.B. King, Etta James, T-Bone Walker, Jackie Wilson, Brooke Benton, the Four Tops, the Temptations, Roy Hamilton, and later a young Stevie Wonder. They all played Idlewild. Aretha Franklin, as the Queen of Soul herself, performed here. As one historian of the resort put it, in that era, if you were a black entertainer, you did Idlewild in exactly the way that, to be taken seriously, you had to be approved at the Apollo in Harlem. This little town in the Michigan woods was the Apollo of the North. But you have to understand what Idlewild really was underneath the music and the beaches and the celebrities, because that is what makes its ending so heartbreaking and so strange. Idlewild was a whole parallel world. It was proof, made real and physical and set on the shore of a lake, of what black America could build when it was left alone to build it. A woman named Edna Brown, who first came to Idlewild as a baby in 1940 and grew up to retire there, described the feeling in a single unforgettable sentence. Everyone, she said, was like family to you. And you knew that there was no door that would ever be closed to you here. Think about what that sentence means coming from a black American in the 1940s. Everywhere else in her country, doors were closed to her. The resort door, the hotel door, the restaurant door, the school door. 10,000 doors slammed in her face every single day because of the color of her skin. And here, in this one place, in the woods of Flint, Michigan, there was no door that would ever be closed. For the children who grew up spending their summers here, Idlewild taught them something almost no other place in America could, that it was normal, ordinary, unremarkable, simply the way of the world. For the billboards and the business owners and the band leaders and the doctors and the lawyers and every face in every direction to be black, it was a glimpse of a world that did not yet exist anywhere else, a rehearsal for a freedom that had not yet come. And then the freedom came. And that is when Idlewild began to die. On July the 2nd, 1964, President Lyndon Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act into law. And the Civil Rights Act did the thing that generations of black Americans had fought and bled and died for. It outlawed segregation in public accommodations. It made it illegal at last to turn a person away from a hotel, a restaurant, a resort, a beach, because they were black. The wall came down. Every one of those 10,000 doors that had been slammed shut for a century swung open. The whole of America, every vacation spot, every hotel, every beach, every resort that had ever hung out a sign saying this is not for you, was suddenly, legally open to black Americans for the first time in the nation's history. It was the greatest victory imaginable, and it was for Idlewild a death sentence, because think about what Idlewild had actually been. It had been the one open door in a country full of closed ones. Its entire reason for existing, the whole foundation of its success, was that black Americans had nowhere else that they were allowed to go. As the leading scholar of the resort put it with brutal simplicity, segregation is what built Idlewild. The wall of Jim Crow was not just the thing Idlewild protected people from. The wall was the thing that made Idlewild necessary. And when the wall came down, Idlewild lost the only thing that had ever made it essential. Because now, a black family with money to spend on a summer holiday could do the thing they had dreamed of and been denied for their entire lives. They could go anywhere. They could go to Florida, to the beaches that had turned them away. They could go to Las Vegas, to Miami, to the great resorts of the country that had, until that very year, been closed to them, and they wanted to. Of course they wanted to. A woman named Carolyn Stevens, who had been coming to Idlewild since she was a baby and eventually retired there, explained it as plainly as it can be explained. Once we could go other places, she said, we wanted to experience that, and we left. That is a whole tragedy in 11 words. There was no bitterness in it. There was no betrayal. There was just a people, freed at last, walking through the doors that had finally opened out into the wide and beautiful country that had been denied them for 400 years. And who could blame them? Who, having been locked out of an entire nation, would not want to see it all? And the entertainers left too, for the same reason. The great acts who had made Idlewild the summer Apollo could now play the integrated showrooms of Las Vegas and the concert halls of every major city in America for far more money and far larger audiences than a resort in the Michigan woods could ever offer. The talent followed the open doors, just as the vacationers did, and a series of smaller blows landed at the same time. The railroad that had carried so many thousands to Idlewild ended its service to the nearby town, cutting off the easy pipeline of visitors. The result was swift and merciless. The crowds that had swamped the town every summer thinned and then vanished. The clubs that had hosted Aretha Franklin fell quiet. The 300 businesses began to close, one after another, because the customers who had sustained them were now spread across the whole of America. The hotels emptied, the cottages, passed down or sold off, sat vacant more and more of the year. And Idlewild simply could not adapt its way out of the problem because it had a fatal weakness that had always been hidden by the crowds. It was remote, deep in one of the poorest rural counties in Michigan, with no economic engine of any kind except the summer visitors themselves. When the visitors stopped coming, there was nothing to fall back on, no industry, no year-round economy, just the woods, the lakes, and the memory. The younger generations who had grown up in a more integrated America and did not carry the same attachment to the resort their grandparents had built had little reason to return, and so the population dwindled, the buildings decayed, and the roofs began slowly to cave in under the Michigan snow. That is the fall of Idlewild, and it is the only fall in this entire story that has no villain in it, and that is precisely what makes it the hardest one to sit with, because Idlewild forces you to hold two true things in your hands at the same time, and to feel the terrible weight of both. The first truth is that the end of legal segregation in 1964 was one of the greatest and most necessary victories in American history, a triumph paid for in blood, a righteous and overdue liberation of millions of people from a system of daily cruelty and humiliation. There is no mourning that. There is only celebrating it. And the second truth, sitting right beside the first, is that this same victory dissolved an entire world that Black America had been forced to build in the shadow of that cruelty, and that a great deal of beauty was lost in the winning of it. Because Idlewild was not the only casualty of freedom. This was the same quiet force that hollowed out Sweet Auburn Avenue in Atlanta and drained the black metropolis of Bronzeville and emptied black business districts in every city in America. When the walls of segregation finally fell, the captive black markets and the captive black communities that those walls had created were set free, and being free, they dispersed into the wider country, and the separate world that had been built out of necessity slowly came apart. The very success of the civil rights movement carried within it the unmaking of the parallel black America that segregation had forced into existence. That is one of the great, sad, complicated truths of the 20th century. And Idlewild is its purest, most poignant symbol, a paradise that existed only because of a wall, and that emptied the moment the wall was gone. So how do you mourn a place that died because your own people finally won? You do it the way the people of Idlewild themselves do it. You hold both truths at once. You do not wish the wall back, never that, not for a single second. And you also refuse to let the beautiful thing that the wall once made be forgotten. And that is exactly what is happening in Idlewild today, because the story does not quite end in the silence and the caved-in roofs. In recent years, a small and determined community, the descendants of the families who built Black Eden, some of them now the fifth and sixth generation to walk these shores, Osolon, along with newcomers who fell in love with the place and its history, has been fighting to bring Idlewild back. In 2012, the town celebrated its centennial, 100 years since those four white couples bought the woods around the lakes. There is an Idlewild Historic and Cultural Center now working to preserve the memory. There are music festivals and film festivals, and dreamers who talk, only half joking, about turning Idlewild into the next Sundance, a place where ideas and art and culture come together again, the way they did in the Chautauqua tents a century ago. The old-timers come back in the summers. The music plays again, if only for a weekend at a time. And the memory of Louis Armstrong on the lake, of Aretha on the stage, of 25,000 people who came to one small town in the woods to be, for a few precious days, completely and unremarkably free. That memory refuses to die. Stand on the shore of Lake Idlewild on a warm night in July, when the festival is playing and the cottages have filled up again for a weekend. And you can feel both of the truths at once. You can feel what was lost, this astonishing, joyful, one-of-a-kind world, gone quiet in the woods. And you can feel what was won, the open country, the fallen wall, the doors that will never be closed again, the freedom that emptied this paradise precisely because it was so complete. Idlewild is the one of all we have ever told you about that came wrapped inside a triumph. Nobody took it from its people. Its people left it walking out through doors that had finally, after 400 years, swung open. And the leaving, heartbreaking as it was itself the victory they had been praying for all along. They did not lose Black Eden to a bulldozer or a fire or a mob. They gave it up for something greater. They traded a paradise in the woods for the whole of America. And on a summer night on the shore of that quiet lake, you can still hear the echo of everything it cost them and everything it was worth.